Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's currently 1 o'clock. We'll give it a few minutes before we get started here to allow other participants to join the meeting. Thank you. Well, let's get started here. Good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for joining us for the State Water Resources Control Board's Water Rights Fee Stakeholder Meeting. This meeting is being held virtually through Zoom and webcast platform, and also is being recorded. My name is David Ceccarelli, and I'm the Fee and Revenue Branch Chief within the Division of Administrative Services. Today, we have many of the Fee and Revenue Branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that this meeting runs as smoothly as possible. If any time throughout this event you find yourselves having technical difficulties, please email us at the email that's on the screen, waterrightsfees@waterboards.ca.gov, and staff will be happy to assist you. From the Water Board's Fee and Revenue Branch, and assisting me today is Cassandra White and Josh Warblum. Both of them will be helping with the presentation. Individuals attending via Zoom, please use the raise the hand function if you'd like to ask a question or provide a comment. If you are joining us through the webcast, you can also submit a comment or ask a question by emailing the email on the screen. In the past, there has been a few delays in the broadcast through the webcast. Therefore, throughout the meeting, staff may pause for a moment so the broadcast can catch up to the listeners. Again, we thank you for joining us in this virtually today. We thank you for your patience as we've moved into this 100% virtual meeting space. We're doing our best to ensure everyone can participate in an effective way. So let's just go over a few meeting guidelines. One, remember to use the handouts that were sent to you via email. If you don't have the handouts, don't worry. We'll be sharing the documents on the screen. You can request a copy of the documents after the meeting, or the handouts are posted on our Water Board's fee webpage. Again, as I mentioned before, if you have any technical difficulties, please email us and we'll be more than happy to help you. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Remember, I know I just froze. Excuse me, thank you. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Remember, you can submit comments and questions throughout the event by sending them to the water rights fees at waterboards.ca.gov email. And then finally, for the meeting to run efficiently and stay on track, we're requesting each participant who wants to ask a question to please ask one question at a time. I understand you may have a clarifying question to your original question, and that's acceptable. Once your question is fully answered, we're going to move on to the next participant's question, and you'll be put back into the order of participants who are requesting to ask a question. In addition, we respect all opinions and input. However, if the discussion starts to move away from the intent of the meeting, which is to discuss water rights fees, then I'm going to ask that the participant and I meet offline to coordinate these discussions further and involve the appropriate staff as needed. So at this point, let's go ahead and review the agenda. Just give us a sec. We'll bring the agenda up here. Thank you. So item number 2 will be that we're going to review the water rights and how this for fiscal year 22-23, how we ended in expenditures and revenue. And so that'll be attachment 1. Also, per request through a stakeholder request, we're asked to kind of to lay out the position count, the program position data, which will be attachment 2. This is a kind of similar request that we got earlier this morning that was presented in the water quality program. Attachment 3 will be the water rights budget cost drivers. Attachment 4 is the fund condition. Attachment 5 will discuss our budget change proposals. 6, we're going to discuss some potential fee changes. So kind of teeing off some potential changes that we may be proposing. As we start to flush these out, we'll have a more concrete proposal and options at the June stakeholder meeting. And then we want to have a discussion on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act fees, which is item number 7. And then we'll have an open discussion, and then of course next steps, and which leads to our next stakeholder meeting, which is June 13th. So let's move into item number 2. Cassandra White and my staff is going to take these next 2 slides here. I just want to mention that in the fall we had reached out to stakeholders and we were inquiring about what other information that they'd like to see in our stakeholder process and what we can share. And as I mentioned before, and I know I talked about this a little earlier in the water quality meeting, because of the lack of having accounting reports with Fiscal, there were some years where we were unable to extract information and put it into a report and being able to present it to the stakeholders. We're coming out of that, and we're starting to get more up-to-date data, and we're able to now be able to pull reports and pull information. So with that said, the next couple of slides were again requested from stakeholders, and you know, we have some plans to make them as part of a routine stakeholder process, at least during the first meeting in the fiscal year fee cycle process. So Cassandra, I'll toss this to you now.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So this first table, it's a snapshot of fiscal year 22-23 Water Right Fund expenditures broken out by state operations and pro rata by the water rights program activities. The table, so it shows applications and various different tasks within the one water rights program. So the total state operations is 27.6 million, pro rata 1.8 million, for a total of 29.4 million for expenditures for the year. And then the table below shows total, just a side-by-side view of total expenditures for the Water Rights Fund and also total revenue for the Water Rights Fund. So again, the 29.4 is the expenditures and 30.6 is total revenue. And the footnote mentions that state operations does not include CDTF, other state operations, CDTFA and Cal EPA, but I wanted to mention it does include the supplemental pension assessment is in state operations. And if you go down to the next slide, so these set of tables show the authorized positions for the Water Right Fund by program activity. And again, various activities that are listed: application, Bay Delta, cannabis, etc. And if you go to the next slide, please. And then the last one is the Water Rights Fund administration and miscellaneous programs, activities total. And again, just as David mentioned, the intent is that we will provide this information for the prior fiscal year annually in our March stakeholder meeting.
So let's move back to attachment 1, and then I think there's a couple of questions that we can help answer at this time. Bob, good afternoon.
Hey, and good afternoon, guys. Using the term generically. To quote ESPN, come on, man. The WRF admin and miscellaneous, 17 million out of 29. Maybe at some point we could get a little more detail about what might go into that.
So we'll take a look at it. I know that that we were having a little bit of a hard time kind of breaking down the number of positions. I know Eric Eckall is on the call. I'm not sure if he's seen that chart yet, but if he has any other breakdown of kind of where the positions are being allocated at.
Yeah, so it says water right admin and miscellaneous. So
Correct.
it's not just admin, it's miscellaneous positions throughout the division. So if you go forward and show that table that listed them all out.
Gary, can you move the attachment 2?
One more page.
One more page.
Right there. Yeah. So if you look at the bottom couple of that, right, the senior water resources control engineer, the senior ES, senior WRCE, staff service analyst SSM1, the SOUP WRCE, and the 13 WRCEs, those are all in the division. So it's, most of that is actually in the division, and there are some attorneys that we support. You can also see the EG, the scientists, those are also in the division. The office techs and the typist in the general, those are also in the division. So the actual number of like outside the division here, it's a couple of attorneys, which is only a handful, and that's pretty much it. The assistant chief counsel.
Okay, thanks, Eric. And
Yeah.
even a handful of attorneys is too many, but oh.
I won't tell them you said that. Yeah.
And I think what we were just trying to lump them up, Bob, is I know some of them were clericals and there's some analyst staff there and of course attorneys and things like that. They're working for the whole water rights program. They weren't just designated to like a certain program. And as Eric said, that they are within the division themselves. Steve, you had your hand up. Good afternoon.
Maybe about 3 questions, if you don't mind.
No
On
problem.
this table, this is over half the staff. Is there a way to kind of break this down a little bit, that a certain amount of this maybe is enforcement, some percentage of it is whatever other functions, just to make this a little finer? I think that's where Bob was going with it, but something with a little more detail, just refine these numbers down a little bit so we kind of know where they're at, would be great.
Okay.
Back to attachment 1.
Back to attachment 1. There you go.
Yeah. The pro rata, is it being charged entirely against the Water Right Fund, admin and miss, or is it prorated across the various programs?
Well, it's at the let me so pro rata is allocated to the whole water board, and the number's roughly some around 25, $30 million. Of that, then it gets spread to all the funds in our organization. So at a fund level for water rights, their fund level is, 1.8 million or so. That was the charges for 22, 23.
Okay. And then if we're starting to look at where costs are actually incurred, then that would be prorated across whatever those whatever those programs are, I would guess.
What pro rata is it's other state operations. So it's not even our staff. It's like Department of Finance's cost. It's state controllers. It's the other agencies that manage all these funding accounts or support the state operation or water board state operations. All organizations get hit this. So it doesn't really get spread on these individual like programs here because it hits the fund itself. And so that's why we have it separated, here 27.6 million are our state operations costs. And then the share of pro rata, the water board share of pro rata for the water rights fund is 1.8 million. And Department of Finance breaks down how we kind of assess the pro rata, and it's usually the size of the fund. So like if you look at the WDPF, the Waste Discharge Permit Fund, that's that's a $200 million program now. So their fund is taking about 14 million of pro rata cost.
Okay, well, at the point, probably where we're talking here, it probably is not that material, but I look at like applications are about 20% of this. I would assume about 20% of that would be towards the applications program, but I'll leave it at that for today. The other question I had, we've talked about general fund support overall for the program. Is what's shown here for the water rights fund, is this the entire water rights fund? Or is this just the portion of the water rights fund that's being that user fees are going towards?
So this is just a portion for fees themselves. I don't have the exact number that supports the water rights activities in the organization right now in front of me. But you're right. There's a portion of general fund that comes in, and then there's some little bit of federal money that comes in also. There's a tobacco tax fund that comes in. So it's bigger than, of course, what we're allocating here of almost like a $40 million program. Eric, I don't know if you know the split on that.
It's I don't know the exact number, but in the last, I would say 10 years, we used to be 95% fee funded. And I think as of last year, it was closer to 60%. So we've grown the general fund proportion significantly over the last couple of years. The positions that we got last year were all general fund supported. So now it's closer to probably a 60-40 split, but I don't have the exact number.
I'd encourage maybe another table, just really simple, that has the total water rights fund, general fund supported, and fee driven portion. Because that's a question we get a lot that I have to address at my home boards. But that would be really helpful. And I think that would help support that, yeah, there is general fund support coming in. We're not bearing the brunt of everything.
No, I appreciate that comment. We did there for a few years have a table like that, and we'll definitely put it together with this package and have it for the June meeting.
Great, thank you. That would be greatly appreciated. And those are my questions at this point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's then move on to the next item on the agenda. So at this slide here, we're looking at the budget cost drivers for the Water Rights Fund from our fee setting budget in 23-24 to the fiscal year 24-25 governor's January proposed fee setting budget. Josh has just jumped on, and Josh is going to go ahead and present this slide at this time.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Werblin. I'll be going through the cost drivers with you today. So the first table in this section is going to show last year, fiscal year 23-24's fee setting budget at 34.9 million, followed by the governor's January proposed budget for this next fiscal year 24-25 at 37.7 million. So the net difference of that is about 2.798 million, or an 8% increase. So we're going to move to the second table, which is going to show the different parts of the cost driver that are causing the increase. So first section on this is the state operations, the first cost driver. We see it has an $836,000 increase, or about 2.4%. This is primarily employee compensation, healthcare, salary, retirement. Next is the pro rata driver. This was actually a decrease this year of about $2,000. It comes out to less than a 0% or less than 1% zero. It's pretty negligible, so we'll just mark it as zero. Really no net change there. The next one is CDTFA. This is California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. This helps with the expenditures incurred for processing annual voices for the Water Rights Fund and the collection activities of those invoices. There was an increase of about $7,000 on this one, which again comes out to about a 0% net change. The last section of the cost drivers is our BCPs. We have 3 this year. After I go through these, Cassandra's going to take the wheel here and kind of go through the details of the BCPs, but I'll just kind of introduce them and their net changes. So the first one we have is a 24-25 establishment and implementation of in-stream flow objections in the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds BCP. This is a $711,000 BCP, or about a 2% increase. The next one is the 24-25 information security and private office staffing BCP, which is $39,000, or 0.01%. And then the last BCP is the new groundwater recharge permitting unit BCP, which is about 1.2 million, or 3.5%. So that's all the cost drivers, their increases and relative percentage changes. Like I said, I'm going to pass it to Cassandra at this point. She'll go through some of the details on the BCPs and what they provide.
Thank you, Josh. So going back to the first BCP, the establishment and implementation of in-stream flow objectives in the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds. So the purpose of the BCP is it will establish support for implementing long-term in-stream flow objectives in the Scott River and Shasta River watershed. And that $711,000 in funding is for 2 PYs. The second BCP is the Information Security and Privacy Office staffing to enhance information security office staffing capabilities and establish a new privacy office. The new PYs will provide staffing needs in the areas of privacy, technical security, and informational security compliance. The total BCP is $629,000, but it's spread over several funds, various funds here at the water boards, and it funds 4 PYs. The water rights portion of that $629,000 is $39,000. And then the last BCP is a new groundwater recharge permitting staff. And the purpose is to review recharge applications, implement new recharge reporting requirements established in the Public Resources Code, coordinate with applicants and the Department of Water Resources on future recharge projects, help address the water rights permitting backlog, and support hearings for protest resolution. The funding, that 1.2 million, is ongoing funding to support 5 PYs, 4 of which will be in the water rights program activities, and 1 PY will be the Office of Administrative Hearing. And that is the BCPs.
Thank you, Cassandra. Eric, is there anything you'd like to add regarding the 2 program-related BCPs?
I don't have much. I think the way that it was described there was a good overview, and I'm sure we'll get questions about it, and we can answer those questions as they come up.
Okay, thank you. Bob, your hand's raised.
Well, we've been down this road before, and I could probably give Eric's answer for him, but with all due respect, the recharge program is a statewide benefit for all 40 million Californians. It's water supply or water supply offset. I understand that there are some benefits to permit holders in that, according to the BCP, it will expedite the review and approval of permits, provide public outreach and technical guidance, although I'd like to see that specified for applicants, and an equitable approach for processing applications. Imagine there's those who would dispute that, but at any rate, I get that there's some benefits in there, Eric, but golly, full boat for fee payers, I don't know. What do you think?
So one thing I think we need to clarify, and David, please correct me here if we're wrong. This is just the initial description of the relative change. This is not what we're proposing in terms of a fee increase. And there's a number of considerations that will go into what will ultimately be a proposed fee change, which we probably won't see until the next stakeholder meeting, which I think is what, June, maybe, David?
Correct.
So right, this is like just looking at it in terms of relative percent. What we don't know yet is exactly what our carryover is going to be from the previous year. We are also contemplating a number of fee changes to the applications themselves, right, to try and offset the kind of relative percentage, recognizing that if we're going to be working on applications, we need to recover more of those costs from the applications themselves. And just as a heads up, we're looking at fairly substantial increases. Again, we have to vet those through the group here. We have to look at, get input from our board and our executive levels, which we haven't done yet. So, this is a huge number of caveats as always. But, we do recognize that we have to update these. And Bob, this is a comment that you've brought up before, asking us to be more timely in kind of adjusting these fees, recognizing that some of them hadn't been updated, since they were initially established. And about 4 years ago, we did this for petitions, right, where we changed a bunch of fees and changed them from the base level and, kind of realigned them with more modern cost estimates. We hadn't yet done that for applications to a huge degree. We had done some, but this year I think we're looking to do that more whole scale across the board for applications, not just groundwater permitting, which we will include, but all applications as a whole. We're also looking at the kind of baseline rate for the lowest level of fee payers, which again, we haven't really fully evaluated yet. We haven't vetted, and we may move away from this tack later on, but a moderate fee increase there too. They haven't been changed in about 4 or 5 years. I think it's currently $300. Not a huge fee increase there, but inflation has occurred, and so upping it to $325, $350 in that range as well. And that is honestly, you up at $25 at that base level, and that's about enough to offset 1 or 2% of this number here. So there's other things we're considering, and the 8% you see here is not the initial proposal for the fee increases to fee payers across the board. Is that fair, David?
Yes, no, that's a fair explanation. I would try to explain that the 8% is really what the needed revenue is, right? And as we start to look at adjustments of our fee structure, it doesn't mean that we're going to do an 8% across the board. And then keep in mind, it's kind of early in the process. This is this is based on the Jan 10 budget, and so these numbers could change. But yeah, as Eric mentioned, this is really looking at, we need 8% additional revenue to cover our costs at this point, and how we get there. And as Eric says, we are looking at making some adjustments, and we'll talk a little bit further about those in our potential fee proposals. But yeah, the numbers don't exactly mean that's going to be our fee adjustments for now. Steve, I think you were next up in the queue there.
I'm fine if if Chuck wants to go first and I can follow up or however you want to do it.
All right, well, let's go, Chuck.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, related to kind of the water quality discussion we had this morning, I'm really curious about the BCPs and whether that they're adding funds in for specific programs in specific areas of the state, and what would be the rationale if this were to be the fee proposal, but I know it's not. What would be the rationale to spread it amongst all fee payers, or have it focused on only those areas that are directly related to the particular BCP, like Scott River and Shasta River? And then the third one is listed, new groundwater recharge. I'm having a hard time remembering the discussion from previous years, but I kind of seem to recall that there was a lack of permit applications for groundwater recharge, or there was a disconnect somewhere between where the state thought you were going to get groundwater recharge permits and where you're actually getting them. And that relates to my question is there a geographical distribution of this groundwater recharge permitting? Is it more in the Central Valley or elsewhere than other parts of the state?
I can respond to that second question. You're absolutely right that there has been a lag in terms of the number of groundwater recharge applications that we had been seeing. We were anticipating a substantial increase when Sigma was passed. We kind of thought, hey, people are going to be looking for other sources of water, and recharge is probably one of the primary opportunities, but we weren't seeing those level of applications. And we had said, we probably will need staff at some point in the future, but we held off in terms of asking for new PYs until we started to see that uptick. In the last 2 years, we've seen the uptick. And in the last 14 months, we've processed 18 underground storage applications. I think we have another 2 pending. So, all of a sudden it's become a huge workload, and we anticipate it will continue to be a substantial workload going forward. And so now we're asking for the positions.
And is that a particular area of the state, or
It's really not. I mean, primarily you could say Central Valley, but not exclusively. And we've also done permits in the Scott River watershed. We've worked in the Russian River watershed. There have been inquiries from the Ventura. And so it's a fairly broad and substantial geographic distribution. If you add in the flood recharge elements from last year, which is not part of what we're asking for, we're kind of absorbing that workload. You also add in then the Eastern Sierra, the LA Aqueduct, and some other regions as well.
Yeah, I'm probably speaking out of turn because I haven't checked with my client, Imperial Irrigation District, but I don't know how. I remember Imperial talking about wanting to do some recharge at some point in time, but I don't know if they ever pursued that. So I'll have to check in. But I'd be curious if you've seen anything from that area.
I have not seen anything from Imperial. There have been other activities in Desert Water Agency. We haven't necessarily permitted those, but there's a lot of recharge that occurs kind of in the Palm Springs, Palm Desert area where they have those big recharge ponds up against the mountains. So it's not unheard of. There's generally not kind of the same level of water supply, but as people look towards these flood management efforts, it wouldn't surprise me if we see something in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would have a general concern is if there's areas of the state that aren't seeking these groundwater recharge permits, why should the water rights fees for those particular areas be charged the BCP amount, and should that be more directly located for those that are directly benefiting? But we can pursue that later as more details come out. Thank you.
Steve, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I guess the last one is the BCPs, and this is probably my ignorance. Are these legislatively directed, or are these BCPs originating out of the state board that themselves?
This year, they did originate out of the state board themselves.
Okay.
They don't always,
Thank
but these 3 do.
Okay, thank you. And then just a statement. And I recognize based on the comments the percent is going to change depending on how costs are allocated between applications and baseline fees. But if that full 8% were implemented just across the board as in historic fashion, that would be a $45,000 impact to the Kings River Water Association. So it is a significant impact when it gets into real on the ground dollars. So I just put that out there for something to chew on while you're looking at this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Let me just pause for a sec. Are there any questions from the emails online?
No questions at this time.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Let's go ahead and move to the next item. So I wanted to go over the fund condition statement. This is for the Water Rights Fund. We had for fiscal year, just kind of finalizing fiscal year 22-23, we had a beginning balance about 5.4 million. Total fee revenue was about 30.7 million. Our total expenditures were 30.2 million. Sorry, 30,216,000 to be exact. Which basically there was a surplus of $488 when you compare expenditures and revenues into the program. And so our ending balance was nearly 6 million, about 5.8 million, which left us with about a 19.5% reserve. So moving forward, looking at the numbers, so this is a projection for 23-24, realizing that our expenditure data is based on budgetary information. And then again, as I kind of mentioned earlier in the water quality item, we normally expected our expenditures, our true expenditures based on some salary savings with vacancies and so forth, is lower than this budgeted number here. So with the carryover of the 5.8 million, we're expecting about 33 million in fee revenue for 23-24. Budgetary expenditures are about 35.7, with an ending balance about 3.1 million, which would leave the fund reserve about 9.1%. And then, of course, moving forward, if there were no increases, you could see how the balance would basically almost drop to a 0%. And this kind of moves us into our 24-25, where again, we're trying to line our revenues and expenditures up. So beginning balance of 3.1 million, with if we collect total revenue of 37.4 and our expenditures are 37.7. So again, our revenues and our expenditures are lining up. We would end our fund with about almost 3 million, about 2.8 million in fund reserve. And then the reserve would be about a 7.8% reserve at that point. Again, early in the process, because this is reflecting our 23-24 data is based on budgetary expenditures. We continue to monitor and project the revenue that's coming in from the invoicing process for 23-24, which we work with the California Department of Tax and Fees. And also our application in-house revenue comes to the water board. So we compile all the revenue data to continue to monitor that for fiscal year 23-24, the year we're in. And then as accounting is running labor reports each month, then we're able to look at the actual true expenditures, and we're able to shore up our expenditure information, which we should have better expenditure information in our June meeting and get off of the budgeted numbers and work more with just the kind of more projected of what expenditures are going to look like. So, this is again kind of point in time. The one true thing here at this point is 22-23 has closed, and so we're final on those numbers. Don't expect any difference in those numbers. But again, moving forward in our next current fiscal year and the what we refer to as the budgeted fiscal year for 24-25, we'll definitely see some changes and some updates there. And then of course, with the May revise, if that includes or subtracts any of our proposals, then we'll reflect that into the expenditure line item. So go ahead and I guess move to the next slide or next item.
Yeah, I've got a quick question there.
Sure, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't get to my reactions button.
No problem.
Let's see. Something, again, this is looking forward and kind of as you're considering where you maybe make recommendations coming forward on your ending balance. States overall looking at a very large budget deficit. Go back 10, 15 years where we had the big budget deficits before. The state went through and scraped a lot of these funds for whatever reserves were sitting in them. I would encourage maybe looking at a smaller, more minimum carryover, recognizing that's going to potentially raise rates quicker in future years. But I'd rather not have funds sitting there that are getting swept into other purposes. So just as you're kind of planning and thinking as a fee payer, I would prefer to see that.
Right.
So-
I agree with that. We're also in the conversation with some, we, especially now our budget office and myself and other staff are in a lot of communications with the Department of Finance. One thing that's somewhat in our favor, and I understand that some of our fee funding programs have reserves, but what finance recognizes that our organization for the most part is a fee supported program. So they realize that it's difficult for us to operate if we don't have, the fee revenue there and or some of the reserves for economic uncertainties. So there are a little bit of securities there, but I do recognize that right now in the somewhat of a crisis of what the state's going through, that there is a potential look at any dollar that's available and ask, or basically take it away. So I appreciate your comment, Steve, and I recognize that.
Thank you for considering that.
Thank you. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, my comments along the same vein as Steve's in that why is the percent change so high as 8%? Like for water quality, you talked about this morning, I think you were talking about a 4% buffer, and this seems like it's quite a bit larger, and I don't quite understand why you would be shooting for such a high margin given the concern that Steve just raised.
Well, it goes, a lot of it has to do when you're talking about a reserve, and you have to kind of look at the actual size of the fund itself, right? And so when we're talking a WDPF, and now we're talking a WDPF that's 200 million, which is almost 4 times the size of the water rights fund. So when I try to manage that around a 5% reserve, and usually a 5% reserve on the the 200 million is roughly a $10 million reserve or so. So when we're talking percentages, it's definitely, it would definitely be lower on our bigger funds. Now, when you're talking about water rights or our safe drinking water account that helps support the drinking water program, and now you're talking about, $35-40 million programs, if you start getting into the 4 or 5%, now your reserves are getting a couple $1 million, and that's what finance would tell us is that if there's some uncertainty that comes up again, we had to use a lot of our reserves during COVID, and hopefully that's a once in a lifetime experience, but if there's any other budget collapses, that they like this to have some type of reserve. What I will say, and this is for me managing the fund, and I know I've kind of talked to you guys about this before, but this is important to kind of understand. So, and this is the tricky kind of challenging part I have with the budget process. So let me just kind of explain this real quick. So as we know, the governor will approve a budget act, July 1. And let's say that there's some negotiations with some unions that don't get approved prior to the budget act. So just an example, let's say the engineers throughout the state, let's say come September, October in that fiscal year, they've negotiated and they say that these, employee compensation / raises go back to are retroactive to July 1. Well, what happens is that the Department of Finance, there's a what's referred to as a 7(8). It's a form where they go ahead and they have to calculate all of these increases the staff costs, and they build that actually into the budget. Now, I didn't set fees off of that, right? There's some additional costs that I see in our organization. And so I don't come back to the fee payers and say, hey, by the way, there was some employee compensation that was negotiated. It raises our state operation cost by $500,000, $1 million. That's why I have the reserve there, is it helps offset it, right? And this has happened several times. And so, and I'm speaking for our organization. We don't get into the involvement of these negotiations. These are done outside of our organization. These are through the state unions and through the legislators, and that's all agreed upon, of course, and approved by the governor. But I just bring that up because that is something that's happened in the past, and that's somewhat of why we try to carry some type of reserve. There's no magic number, and I agree. During times of difficulty, we try to utilize our reserve, and there's times when we help take our reserve and help minimize fee increases. And so I've mentioned that before in our stakeholder meetings, and it's something it's part of my proposals. If I know we can utilize it, I will make a recommendation of trying to draw down our reserve to help minimize fee increases.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I totally get the idea. If you've got a smaller fund and you've got greater fluctuations, the percentage wise could be more of an impact on a smaller fund than on a larger fund. But I don't know what the history of the water rights fund is. Is there a history of huge fluctuations going back maybe 10 years or so, or has it been pretty consistent?
There have been a few years when there were some larger fund reserves. I think Eric can speak to this. I know there were a couple of years where we got a couple of large applications that came in. That we did get there was a loan that was put into the reserve, into the fund, but then that was eventually paid back. So there have been some, and then I know that there was a time where the furloughs basically. So what I mean by that is we set fees at, meaning that we needed to generate 30 million in revenue because we thought we'd have 30 million in state operation cost, and then furloughs hit and we saw our savings of $2 or $3 million because of reduced expenditures in the fund. And so that built up the reserve. And so over the years there've been some years where the reserve has been higher than others. It just we do our best to try to manage it and try to keep our costs as low as possible and try to maintain that reserve.
Yeah, I seem to recall that 4 or 5% reserve was always kind of what you talked about in previous meetings in years past. And I guess I just would be interested in knowing what would be the rationale of going that high, or going as high as 7.8 or 8%. If really the target has always been historically 4 to 5% reserve.
Well, I know I've mentioned 5%, and for the WDPF, I know that definitely that's been kind of the baseline, and I try to maintain that. The water rights and safe drinking water count, I know is a little higher than that. I haven't really set a baseline on that. I know on drinking water that Darren would say that we need to drive for around a 10% for some uncertainties there. I definitely wouldn't want to go any lower on a 5% for water rights, again, just with uncertainties and things like that.
Well, I'm not suggesting lower than 5%. I'm suggesting something lower than 7 or 8%. Yes, thank you. That's a good for now. We'll talk about it more.
Thank you, Chuck. So I think we already touched on the budget change proposals, and again the link on the just wanted to highlight on the handouts. The links will take you to the Department of Finance, and if you want to read or if you haven't already, the BCPs are there. So I wanted to move to item number 6. I know we already touched on some of these, but I did, Eric and I had a conversation a week ago, and I think Gary or Cassandra, do we have that list that we were talking about? And what I did here was these were just kind of through communication with water rights. Again, we haven't flushed a lot of this out, but this is just kind of a general high big picture of kind of what we're looking at. And what I've done here too is we've scrolled down to the second page. This is our fee structure. So if we need to kind of point to, what the fee is now or what we're looking at potentially changing, just for some content, I wanted to bring that up. But back to the top screen there, the first page. And as Eric mentioned, I mean, the gist of these fee increases is to kind of better focus the cost towards the specific applicant or beneficiary, which should ultimately reduce or minimize across the board increases for all fee payers. And the first one again is more or less looking at our base fee for our permits and our licenses. As Eric mentioned, I went back and looked at it. The last time we changed this fee was in 2019, and we increased it to $300. And looking at historic increases, it's been in the ballpark between $25 and $50. Keep in mind that the fee for these permits and license, if you're under 10 acre feet, you haven't seen an increase in fees in 5 years. So as we're just trying to fairly put the for equity purposes, trying to spread this fee to everybody. We recognize again it doesn't generate a lot of revenue, but we're also again want to try to adjust the fees accordingly. I think Eric kind of touched on most of these. Eric, if there's anything you want to add, but for the next one, which would be the temporary groundwater recharge permits.
Yeah, I mean, the table below, it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. And I know Amanda Montgomery is also listening in, although she may have some microphone issues. But Amanda, please jump in here if you want to add anything as well. We're looking at the temporary groundwater recharge permits. They've been cheap relative to the grand application fees for a couple of years, and recognizing some of the points that were made earlier, that the benefit of the groundwater application fees does have a substantial benefit to the applicant. It's not universal, right? We do protect the other diverters and ecosystems, and that's why it's applied across the entire water rights fee system. But we're going to propose adjusting those fees accordingly. And so again, we're expecting a fairly substantial proposal or proposed increase there. Now, again, it doesn't mean it's going to go forward. It still has to go through the board. The board does vote on them. And I guarantee you'll hear objections from those that have gotten temporary groundwater recharge permits because they, have enjoyed the lower fee for a couple of years. But we have to get closer to right sizing the program. And then let's see, I can run through the other ones too, David, if helpful. The water rights application base fee. If you scroll down one page, I think it's the second blue box where it talks about one-time fee categories. The application fee, it's $1,000 plus $15 per acre foot greater than that 10. And it caps out at about 648,000, which is substantial, right? But we don't get those size permanent applications that often. We have gotten a couple in the most recent years, very large one in Merced for 400,000 acre feet. And I think a 2.3 million acre foot application out of the Tuolumne. One of the things we're considering is whether that 648 is appropriate. It's paid the same whether you're 400,000 or 2.3 million. We may be considering raising that fee for the very largest of applications if we continue to get those. Another thing we're looking at is that $1,000 base. I think having a relatively low baseline for very, very small applications is reasonable, right? There's a lot of just kind of very small users, maybe even domestic users, they would be covered by registrations or something else. But when you get in that, 10 acre foot, 12 acre foot kind of range, it's, what, 1,000 plus 15 plus 15 for a 12 acre foot water right application. We'll spend that in the first day of reviewing it. So we're looking at very substantial increases to that baseline number. I don't want to give a number here yet because again, we still have to vet it, but hopefully I'm getting my point across by saying very substantial. It's going to be pretty big. At least that's what we're proposing. If we scroll back up, an application surcharge. What do we mean by that? Well, what we're finding is that some watersheds maybe have an easier permitting pathway than others. And you can imagine that, say, a small application on, a watershed that is relatively unallocated might be easier to go forward than, say, a 2.3 million acre foot application in the Bay Delta watershed. And so an application surcharge would include something like tagging on an additional fee for very, very complicated watersheds. Again, all these things are going to be proposals. They will be all vetted publicly. We're not just going to kind of impose them. So there will be opportunity to comment on them, and I'm hesitant a little bit to give numbers or anything like that, but these are all ideas. And if you have other ideas, I think we'd like to hear your proposals as well. Petition fee clarification. So there's some petitions that we did touch on those a couple of years ago, but there's other petitions where we didn't. For example, one is the FAS designation or fully appropriated stream designations. That cost is relatively low relative to the workload that goes into it. And we may be considering other approaches there. So this is all stuff that we're hoping to have, not hoping, that we will have ready for vetting at our next fee payers meeting.
Thank you, Eric. And yeah, as Eric says, we just kind of wanted to tee it off at this moment. And we're open to, if you guys have any feedback or if you guys have areas where you think we can make some adjustments, we'll be more than happy to listen and consider those. And then as Eric mentioned, we'll have some options as we start to vet the numbers and some proposals for the next June meeting.
And maybe one other thing to raise there, and I think this is kind of understood, but always worth just highlighting again. The challenge in these one-time fees is that we have no guarantee that we'll get any. Right? We could go years between getting a major application in the Bay Delta workshop, so it's not something that we can count on, and say year after year after year, we know we're going to get this base level of income from these one-time fees. That's just the challenge in this inherently. And the proposals I think that we're going to put forward try to address that to a degree, but in another degree, it's dependent on who's submitting applications and who isn't. So it's just a reminder.
Thank you, Eric. Before I move on, I don't see any questions at this time. Are there any questions from the email list?
No email questions.
All right. Okay, thank you. I guess we'll move back to the agenda and we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Eric. So next item on the agenda is our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. I do have some program stuff. I know Zach Mayo is on the line, and also attorney from the Office of Chief Counsel, David Rose, is also on the line. And you may ask, well, why do we talk about the Sigma program within the Water Rights Fee Stakeholder Meeting? Well, the legislators authorized that the funding basically the budget itself, and that the fee revenue is deposited into the water rights fund. And so this is our opportunity to talk about it. We recognize that as fees become generated in this program, that we knew all along that we have to track it separately than our other water rights funds. We've got to ensure that we don't commingle the two programs together, and of course report on them separately. So moving into this item, the board has directed staff to evaluate the current fee structure and eventually bring a proposal to the board at a public meeting for their consideration and adoption. The current annual fee is $300 per well plus $40 per acre foot of groundwater extracted. There's been continued requests from stakeholders for us to reassess the fee structure. Staff does recognize, with multiple basins in probation or potentially in probation with full compliance, that we could be generating significantly more revenue than is required to support the program. So again, we recognize that, and that's why we're looking into potentially adjusting this fee. There are some challenges. Because of the uncertainties in the program, there are challenges in the fee setting process. Back in 2017, when we set up $40, we didn't have a lot of information. We didn't have a lot of data. Kind of we're starting to kind of get a better idea. And this year there are a couple of basins that will be taken to the board for their consideration, be put on probation. One would be in April. I believe it's April 16th is the first hearing. But some of those uncertainties in the program is when and if the basins go in probation. Again, how many basins will be put on probation? How long will a basin stay in probation? The goal is to get the basin out of probation, which basically means that they stop paying fees to the water boards. So we recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty. Staff does anticipate that we will, kind of be evaluating this on a, almost like a month by month basis as basins are in the program, and or are potentially leaving the program. But once the program starts to play out, staff will be able to kind of better evaluate it. And, we'll have more of a routine basis to be able to adjust fees or take fee proposals to the board for potential consideration and adoption of these fees. We also recognize that if we have multiple basins in and there's more or less full compliance, we could have more revenue than covering our cost. It's anticipated our costs right now are roughly around $5.5 million that would support 22 positions that are currently funded by general fund, but eventually move off of general fund and then are authorized to be fee supported. And staff recognizes if that we do start to over collect, that we'll have to put measures into reduce the pot of money that we've received, and that could result in us basically lowering the fees to amount where we're reducing the amount of revenue that we received. We'll have to look at other options too, as we start getting closer to the fee setting process. So kind of a high level overview at this point. Again, I know Zach and then David's on the phone, so if one of you want to kind of chime in at this point to add anything at this point as we're looking at the Sigma fees.
No, not me. I think you covered it at the level we were ready for. Thanks, David.
All right.
Yeah, I think that was great. Thank you, David.
I'm just pausing here for a sec. Are there any questions at this point?
No questions online at this point.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any further questions. We can move this into open discussion. I know we've had, a lot of questions already, but I'm just going to open it up. Does anyone have any comments or definitely, we've been jotting down some of your requests and definitely your feedback that we've already received. But does anyone else have any other comments or feedback at this point?
The only thing I would say is thank you for having the meeting and listening to our thoughts and comments. And if you've got any questions as you're working through things or would like some clarification on those thoughts, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Chuck, you had your hand up?
Yeah, same thoughts as Steve, is that I really appreciate you having the meetings. I guess any more detail you can provide, like you've alluded to, will be great. We'll look forward to it at the next meeting. And I guess what I'd be focusing on is with respect to the client I represent, and make sure the fees are associated, any fee increases are associated with increased costs as a result of the activities within my client's area. And those that are fees that they're being asked to pay that are not directly related to anything in the case of Imperial Irrigation District. I think we'd have questions about that, but we have no problem paying the fees if they're directly related to the activities that we're performing in the Imperial Irrigation District. That's it.
Chuck. So I'm not hearing anything else. Again, next steps, for us internally, we get together, we'll start to meet and vet some of our proposals and as the May revise comes out, we start to evaluate those numbers and evaluate the proposals in there and or the changes that happen from the May revise from the January proposed budget. And then, of course, we'll start putting together handouts and our next meeting is scheduled for June 13th, Thursday, the 13th, and kind of same time frame at 1 o'clock. So from 1 to 3. We'll have those sent out basically about a week prior to the meeting. And again, if you have questions when you receive them, please let us know. Again, in the meantime, if you have any other, as you look through the documents, you have any questions or clarifications, or if some of the things that Eric talked about or questions about the BCPs, please reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to help you out with that. With that said, everyone enjoy the rest of their day and have a great weekend, and we'll be talking soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.